Wee! I need to replace this chair. That's a future video. Anyways, it's snowy. It's very, very snowy. Schnee, if you will. That's what we call it in German. Schnee. Germany, or maybe at least just the greater Hamburg area, has been dealing with quite a lot of schnee lately. And it's clearly not prepared for it. So, anyways, have you heard of Snowstorm Elli? It's so hard to take a major dangerous weather event seriously with a fucking name like that. It came in on Friday, screwed everything up all weekend, and stranded me in Hamburg. I finally got home from what was supposed to just be Friday brunch yesterday, which was Monday, and now it's Tuesday evening. I would have recorded this earlier, but I got food poisoning while stranded in Hamburg. It really wasn't fun. Here's a rundown of my experience going to Hamburg from Stade last Friday for what was supposed to just be brunch. I think the snow is slowly turning to hail. Oh god, it's melting my face. See, the S5 S-Bahn line is usually fairly unreliable, but on a good day, it's a one-seat ride from Stade to Hamburg Central Station, and I'd say that usually takes just around an hour and a half. You can cut that down to just over an hour if you take the RE5, which runs hourly. What we ended up getting on Friday though was getting on a train, that train immediately getting canceled, 2 more pulling in and then also being canceled, and then a 2.5 hour wait, which granted I spent partially at a local Subway eating a sandwich for a replacement bus to arrive. One singular replacement bus for 3 trains worth of people, which just went to the Hamburg Lower Saxony state border. From there it was 3 more trains and a cab for the last mile. Yikes! It's just now past 6 p.m. and I've just arrived at Hamburg Hauptbahnhof from Stade. This is a route that normally is a one-seat ride, only takes about an hour and 20 minutes on a good day. Today it took a bus and 3 trains, and it's just after 6 p.m. So it took, and we left at just around noon, so it took over 6 hours. I'm going to go to my hotel, drown my sorrows in free drinks, thanks Radisson, and play some Railroad Tycoon 3. And the worst part is that wasn't even the worst it could have possibly been. I had a friend from Hanover wanted to come visit, but every single train on the route between Hamburg and Hanover was just canceled for most of the weekend. It was chaos. Ein Bahnkatastrophe. And to some degree, this was totally the weather's fault. It was a massive amount of snow all at once. But I'd like to argue that as bad as this was, it didn't have to be as bad, and we have historical precedent for that. So for those wondering how to avoid this in the future, here's an easy idea of what the Deutsche Bahn or your local trans agency would need to do to prevent this.
Here comes the money!
Here we go. Someone say
Winterization.
Oh, bam, baby, it's that, baby, yeah, you like that name, don't you, little bitch?
It may seem like an oversimplification, but it really is just money. I am really serious. So here's an ad from the last century, back before the botched privatization attempt of the Deutsche Bahn. Fun fact, it might be technically private, but the only shareholder is the German government. The tagline of this ad in English, by the way, is "Everybody is talking about the weather, but not us."
Ja, und das war's dann für diesmal vom Bahnsteig 1. Bis zum nächsten Mal. Wiedersehen.
The DB was just that prepared, and they knew it. I need to give the general international consensus on the old school Deutsche Bundesbahn, as told to me by my dad, who used to drive for the Illinois Central in the US back in the day. Basically, the incredibly reliable, punctual, high-quality service we nowadays associate with Swiss railways today as how the German railways were seen actually all the way into the turn of the 21st century. I am once again bringing up this ad that the DB themselves ran around the year 2000 about how unacceptable a 3-minute delay is.
3 Minuten Verspätung.
Meister, 3 Minuten Verspätung, das ist ein Skandal!
For context nowadays, they legally don't even consider a train delayed unless it's more than 6 minutes late. This from the same operator who had 2/3 of all their long-distance trains last year be delayed to some degree. Though again, as we'll get to, I'd argue that the DB themselves aren't fully to blame here. Now, before we get further into this, let me just talk about the general state of things transit-wise in Greater Hamburg. Well, honestly, just so this strictly doesn't come off as reaming the DB. I'd actually argue we did a better job here in Stade clearing the snow out than Hamburg proper. See, typically in Germany, unlike in countries such as Sweden, but very much like in countries such as the US, clearing roads is a municipal task, but clearing sidewalks is up to private property owners. This led to Hamburg itself being a nightmare to navigate, with icy paths even in what I thought were public areas, and a lot of bus stops and U-Bahn entrances just kind of having snow piled up in front of them. It was really unpleasant and even felt kind of hostile. However, over here in Stade, a much smaller town, where I initially thought the same applied, I saw not only glorified lawn tractors with plows attached clearing sidewalks pretty much the morning after first snowfall, but also smart cars with snow plows for clearing some of the paths around here. That was really neat. And while more infrequent bus service around Stade was cancelled, which sucks, don't get me wrong, the 2001 and 2007 bus lines, which are the most central routes around town, were operating normally, which was actually pretty rad. And due to the decreased amount of traffic on the roads, they were actually pulling into major stops a few minutes early. Getting to Hamburg itself, though, was a mixed bag. The S-Bahn, operated by the Deutsche Bahn, and the RE5, operated by Start, which I believe is actually a DB subsidiary, was a nightmare to use. Poor heating, 2.5 hours to replace a bus that didn't go all the way into Hamburg, just straight up awful, especially the communication, just such piss poor communication. I went to a DB service center to ask if a bus was going to come at some point. She literally just said, "Yeah." However, when we got into Hamburg proper, the U-Bahn bus routes operated by the Hochbahn, mwah. Well, obviously the snow plow issue I mentioned earlier was there, and there were definitely bus service cutbacks. I think they actually did a pretty serviceable job. The U-Bahn especially just felt normal to ride once I was on board. On the U-Bahn though, it probably helps that the Hochbahn has invested a lot into winterizing infrastructure, and they have for decades now. And I really mean decades. Some of these lines are well over 100 years old. When I made my initial posts online about weather woes in Hamburg, I got a lot of comments like, well, why would they invest in winter infrastructure? It never gets that cold up there, and I've never ever seen snow there, which I don't know what you have or haven't seen here, but saying it just never snows here or never has, well, not to sound like a boomer, but that's bullshit. It's just factually not true. Hamburg is centered around the Elbe River, and it used to freeze over like it has this past weekend every year. And the DB truly did prepare to operate all around Germany in rain, sleet, snow, or about any other weather conditions. By the way, before any certain orange-colored YouTubers tried to come at me for this just being a German problem and Germany sucking and the Dutch are the peak of infrastructure, the Dutch were even fucking worse than we were. No hate to the NS Railways in Netherlands, but if German rail folded 5 minutes into the snowstorm, the Dutch folded 5 seconds into it. Actually, you know what though? I think the Dutch are actually a great example here of people who used to be really prepared for this sort of thing, and now due to a mix of climate change, austerity politics, and people just becoming complacent with things, they just aren't anymore. There used to be this huge ice skating tour across part of the Netherlands called Elfstedentocht, and excuse my speaking, I live in Germany, not the Netherlands, but in English that means literally the 11 city tour. The ice in the canals would freeze over every year, and starting in 1909, contestants would skate the full 200 kilometers route across the province of Friesland. The issue is though, in the past 50 years, there's only been enough ice on the canals in winter to hold it just 3 times. The latest being in 1997. For context, the year before I was born. So I can understand why people would adapt to the new iceless norm, depressing as it is, as it shows a grim acceptance of nothing ever getting better in regards to climate change. Yikes. And if you're like my age and you grew up in the Netherlands, I get it. You've never been alive at a time when the canals did freeze like that. But the Dutch weren't always this unprepared, as we can see from this footage from the 60s, where they were gloating about how good their railways were in the snow, albeit not with nearly as much bravado as the West German Deutsche Bundesbahn. By the way, I know this is mildly academic, not super funny, I'm sorry, here's more Sonic kissing. Discussion of old school German rail has mostly focused on the pre-reunification Deutsche Bundesbahn of West Germany. However, the East German Deutsche Reichsbahn was also very well prepared for the winter. According to a report from 2024, the former East German railways alone, immediately after reunifications, owned 110 snowplows and 6 different snowblower trains. Again, this is just East Germany. This isn't even adding in all the stuff from the West Germans. Meanwhile, over 30 years after reunification and combining them with the Western Deutsche Bundesbahn shortly afterwards, the DB now has only 79 snow removal vehicles nationwide, with 47 being snowplows and 32 being maintenance vehicles meant to aid in snow removal. This is actually already a sign of some investment though, as due to budget shortfalls from the privatization attempts, most of the former snow removal kit was sold off over 20 years ago to make up for budget shortfalls, with the fleet cratering to only 48 pieces of snow removal equipment nationwide for the whole German railway network in 2004. Granted, now with the conservative CDU party being in power again and austerity back on the table, even despite the shitstorm of the snowstorm, there are worries that instead of investing more into snow removal tech for future crazy weather events, we might actually see further cuts. Oh, that's really depressing. Also, not to come off as a dumb North American who craves big machine that goes burr.
You know what they say Ford stands for, don't you? It stands for fix it again, Tony.
But German snowplows for railway use are downright tiny to me. Back where I used to live in Canada, we used to use these big rotary motherfuckers. That thing's like the size of a 2-story building. At home in Stade, Germany, we use bikes or smart cars or plows for clearing snow. But here in Canada, they tend to use things that are a bit bigger. Either way though, no matter which of the 2 DB predecessors we're discussing or who we're comparing them to, the DB's winter woes can be traced back to the botched stitching together and subsequent failed attempt at privatization that happened in the 90s and continued on into the aughts.
And I'll be there.
Unternehmen Zukunft. Deutsche Bundesbahn.
Hello, yes. I'd like to place a bread order. Also, hey, this isn't a sponsored bit, but did you know I just relaunched my merch shop? And now stuff is cheaper and shipped from within Europe, like half the price it used to be? Check it out either via the link in the description below or by using this QR code here. Now, not all was off with the DB's handling of the recent situation. For those who bought a ticket with the DB for one of the affected days and had to cancel your trip, in addition to a refund, the DB is also giving you the option to instead just go ahead and use your ticket for any other service operating on another day. And on a customer service level, I think that's pretty rad actually. What is not so rad though is part of why the rail infrastructure collapsed in such a dramatic way, besides obviously the lack of track-based snow removal infrastructure. See, part of winterizing is also protecting infrastructure itself from freezing in super cold, icy weather. And a huge point of failure I see here is, well, points, or as we call them back in Yeehaw land, switches. Though the major points that actually change between the tracks is in American English are actually called points. But basically the fancy piece of track that lets trains switch from one piece of track to another, okay? Those freezing becoming unable to move would suck majorly and could potentially kill people. There are 2 ways I see that the critical moving mechanisms here could be protected. In Japan, they build these nice little houses or some critical piece of the switches, which in turn shield them effectively from the snow. Meanwhile, in America, the fine people of Chicago use flamethrowers to keep their Metra commuter rail services moving.
Now we're tracking deep freezing temps tonight as Metra brings the heat to warm up the tracks. Always quite a sight to see. They use flames to keep the trains moving.
You know, I've heard they use a different method altogether for Cleveland's RTA Red Line train service over there, but I can't seem to find any footage of it. So I guess Google Cleveland steamer if you want to learn more. Now, of course, there is yet another kicker here. See, the DB is straight up understaffed. As I said in my seminal 2024 classic video that I desperately need to update the rise and fall of Deutsche Bahn, Back in the 90s, it was common practice for the DB to try to operate with 110% of needed staff at any given time. Yeah, not always enough work for everyone to do, but if things got hectic, you wouldn't go scrambling and you'd be able to actually get stuff done. But my current research shows that many sectors of the DB are actually operating with 80% staff or less. And as desperately as they really do need new staff, budget cuts are actually leading to huge layoffs. It's a vicious cycle that has led to the current state of winter chaos, and it's been going on for decades now. Budget cuts lead to cutting staff and selling equipment, which leads to shortages and maintenance issues, which leads to conservatives, namely the CDU, planning more cuts when they get into power. It happened in the 90s, that happened under the Merkel government. I see it happening now. I'm just kind of curious, globally speaking, this isn't just a Germany thing, what's the goal of conservative politicians by forcing essential public services such as railways to try and bang for profitability while cutting their resources whenever they can? In Germany, a driver's license costs literally thousands of dollars. Autobahns are also clogged constantly and just destroy neighborhoods. And what about those who physically can't drive? Is the suffering the point? What the DB needs to fix this in the future is money. Money, perhaps with even some of it earmarked for winterizing and also maybe hiring more staff. I'm sorry, that's what it always comes back to. Even if we don't get as much snow here in North Germany as we used to, isn't it usually cheaper to prepare for the future than to scramble to fix things afterwards anyways? Oh, and also for anyone in power watching, I know a good few folks who work for the DB in various fields, and they're all wonderful, passionate people. Please give them raises, and while you're making improvements, maybe also bring back the DB Lounge in Bremen, please. I'm about to move to Bremerhaven, so it'd be nice. Anyways, I have a fresh set of viewer questions to answer, so here's one for today's video. And it's pretty simple. Will you make an I Survive the ICEL event shirt? Unfortunately, the Deutsche Bahn ICEL train logos, or I guess ICE logos, are copyrighted. I don't think I can make that, unfortunately. However, I do have a bunch of other merch. In fact, I recently just relaunched my merch shop. I switched away from Teespring to Spreadshop based on viewer demand, especially because I found Teespring to be kind of glitchy and their shipping time's not great. And also by switching to Spreadshop, I was able to cut prices on pretty much everything pretty much in half. Oh, and there's also a sale going on for the rest of January 2026 now, just cause. So go get your Piss Mellometer stickers and your TFTSB Nethear stickers and your S5 memes and this one that says, I called your mom last night, did you? I gotta be real, I made that one after eating a massive edible, which is seeing how snowy it still is outside, maybe I should go do that again.